Here's a quick run through of the Evalidator tool in the context of generating data for input to story map elements. So basically you get to the home page and it leads you through a process, a series of steps. First step is to choose what type of retrieval and what type of geographic area you're interested in. So we've got a state retrieval as the default. You could choose circle retrieval and put in a lat long that you're interested in knowing the forest inventory data around. Next, we want to know, are we interested in just forest land or timberland or all land? Generally speaking, FIA attributes are measured, the interesting ones are measured on forest land, like tree level data. We only measure trees on forest land. So just for now, let's just leave it as the default forest land. So here we have to choose what kind of an estimate we want. There's two types of estimates you can make in FIA. An estimate of total amount of something, total area of a forest type, total volume, total biomass, total number of trees, or a ratio estimate, which is generally in per acre. There are other types of ratios this offers you, but I highly doubt that anyone has ever used these. So I think area is the most common denominator of the ratio, a per acre. So volume per acre, number of trees per acre. So obviously if you were the governor of Connecticut and someone told you, oh, you have 3 million trees, that might be an interesting factoid, but you might want to know more, gee, if I go down in any forest of Connecticut, how many trees per acre am I likely to find? Oh, 50. Okay, so there's 50 trees per acre anytime, on average, anytime I'm in Connecticut forest. That's more interesting. For now, I'm just going to stick to just a total, an estimate of totals. So we leave this as the default, and we go over here, and we can choose what attribute we care about. So let's just say we're interested in tree dry weight, which is biomass, dry biomass. We'll say continue. It asks me a couple of other questions. First of all, what aspect of biomass do I want to know? A lot of this stuff relates to forest inventory stuff or forest industry stuff, saw logs, merchantable bull biomass. For ecology stuff, most people tend to use just above ground biomass of live trees. Yeah. So I would just stick with this for this first run. But again, for some of the retrievals you might do, you might choose others. There are different definitions of forest land. There's an RPA, which is a report that we make. I would just stick with the default here, the FIA definition of forest land. And here we have a choice too. If we choose this, it gives us more options for inventory cycles to use. So I'm just going to choose that. We hit continue. Let's say I'm interested in Maine, and I might want the latest inventory cycle, which is, I can see that it's a 5-year cycle. A group of 5 years makes a full cycle. So we're going to choose this very latest, greatest one for Maine. If I wanted to choose more than one cycle, I could choose, oh, gee, the data from 1999 to 2003. In addition, if I hold down the control key, I can select more than one cycle, or eval ID is how they're named in the database. It's basically a different group of plots used to make an inventory estimate. But let's just choose one cycle for this example. Okay, so we say continue. Now we design the table. I'm not going to choose a page variable. You can experiment with that, but it's basically another classification variable. But let's just leave it alone for now, and you can experiment and figure out what it does pretty quickly. So let's say I want to make a table of total dry biomass by what? By congressional district, just for fun. And a column variable, let's just say, let's say forest type group. And again, I could choose any of these things. And again, some of it through trial and error, you might find that it doesn't have any meaning. Maybe ownership class. Let's just say ownership class or owner group. Again, I don't know right now what these are. I know it has something to do with ownership. There'll be different categories, different columns in my table. Here I have an option to, if there's something that has a different definition and it's changed, I can either use the previous definition or the current definition, but generally I just leave the default here. Here, if I had a GIS file of some attribute of interest, like watershed in Maine, for example, watershed ID, and I had all my plots as a GIS file where I have the Latin long plotted in the GIS, I can label each plot CN with its watershed code. And if I follow the directions here, I can just paste in that list of plot CN watershed code value in here, and I will get a new attribute that I can generate a table from. So that's kind of a cool feature, which we could talk about at some point in the future. So anyway, that's about all. And we hit Open Estimates, a new window, and it chugs along for a while. And now I have for each of these 2 congressional districts in Maine, I have the total biomass by ownership group. And this information I might want to take and make a map of. So I can make a map of, for example, congressional district. And I could say, gee, there's more biomass in, see very quickly that there's more biomass in District 1 versus District 2, or vice versa, for a given ownership type. These sampling errors are like, the 68% confidence interval. So it's basically as a percent. So there's this much biomass plus or minus 0.935%. So it's super, super precise estimate. So it's basically plus or minus 1% of that, or what is it, 70,000, I guess, is 1% of that. So it's this amount plus or minus 7,000. Yeah. And the number of non-zero plots, this isn't so interesting. I don't know why they give you that, but it's not so useful. And then finally, this is the SQL, which we could take, oopsies, copy it, paste it into that SQL beautifier tool. It gets beautified so I can read it a little more easily, and then I can do some clever deleting here. So I'll delete this first section, and then I'll delete this last section. And then I will do one more little thing, which I need to do basically there's a correction factor that's applied to the data because of partial plots, and I kind of want to get rid of that. So I will make those changes. And to do that, I basically am going to change everywhere it talks about the adjustment factor. I'm just going to make it a 1. Just, this is a little bit of a kludge. It just makes it a little bit easier for me to run instead of trying to delete big sections of code. And we'll do this, we'll do a 1, pop stratum, adjustment factor macro, we'll do a 1, and that is that. So if I run this, I believe, if I screwed something up, Control A, Control C, if I run this SQL in the database, I should be able to get the plot level values of biomass per plot. Oops, I messed it up. Well, you get the idea. I actually had some extraneous text here at the bottom, but it's the same code I just pasted. And I run it, and what we have here is a plot level summary. So here we have the plot CN, which is the identifier. We have the congressional district it's in, the ownership group code, and the lat long, and the estimated value. So this is the estimate it's in units of biomass per acre per plot, basically. And that is the number, which gets aggregated up to the congressional district level, and the stratification applied and all that stuff. So anyway, but these values are interesting also, and those might be used in a database summary. So really that's about all of just to get started with a validator. And the last thing I was going to mention is that this URL that gets generated, when you go through the wizard and you hit run, it puts this up at the top. This is actually an API call. So if you look at this, this string, you can actually edit this, and you can change it to certain aspects of this. And we have in our database documentation a link to the API documentation that says, which of these API, these terms in the API can be edited and what they mean. So this is basically like an inventory group. Here we have, let's see here, the ownership group, column selected, row selected. So it's the row variable, the column variable, and these things, there's a suite of things that we have to put here in order to construct the URL ourselves, or you can just let Evalidator construct it for you. The point is you can save this URL, and it will just paste it into a web browser, and it will immediately run the query and return the exact same thing we're looking at here, which is a really nice feature. Anyway, that's all. Good luck.